The message arrived on a Tuesday morning at exactly 11:47 a.m. Earth Standard Time, transmitted through quantum channels that humanity had only recently learned to decode. Ambassador David Reed was drinking his third cup of coffee when the communication burst through every diplomatic channel simultaneously, causing screens across the United Nations Space Command to flicker with an otherworldly blue light. 847 species had signed the message. 847 civilizations that had never bothered to contact Earth directly were now formally inviting humanity to attend the first Galactic Peace Summit in over 3,000 years. The holographic seal that appeared above the message bore symbols from creatures humanity had only dreamed about in their wildest science fiction stories. David set down his coffee mug and read the message again. The language was formal, almost dismissive in its tone. The Galactic Council, in their infinite wisdom, had decided that humanity had progressed sufficiently to warrant inclusion in civilized galactic society. The summit would be held on Harmony Station, a massive artificial moon orbiting Zenith Prime, the ancient capital world of the galaxy's oldest civilization. Within hours, the news had spread across Earth like wildfire. Every major news network was broadcasting the story. Children stopped playing in parks to stare at the sky. Adults gathered in coffee shops and workplaces, whispering about what this meant for humanity's future. The stock markets fluctuated wildly as investors tried to predict the economic impact of joining a galactic community. President Martinez called an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. Representatives from every major nation gathered in New York, their faces a mixture of excitement and terror. This was the moment humanity had been preparing for since they first looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. David Reed found himself appointed as Earth's primary ambassador to the summit. At 53 years old, he had spent the last 2 decades working in Earth's fledgling diplomatic corps, handling first contact protocols with the 3 species humanity had previously encountered. He was calm under pressure, spoke 7 languages fluently, and had a reputation for finding common ground even in the most difficult negotiations. His team would be small but carefully chosen. Colonel Patricia Hayes, a decorated military officer, with 20 years of experience in interstellar security, would serve as his military advisor. She was known for her strategic thinking and her ability to assess potential threats without appearing aggressive. Dr. Michael Torres, a xenobiologist who had spent his career studying the few alien specimens humanity had encountered, would provide scientific expertise and help navigate the complex biological and cultural differences they would face. The journey to Harmony Station would take 6 weeks using humanity's fastest ship, the UNS Endeavour. The vessel had been hastily retrofitted with diplomatic facilities and equipped with the most advanced translation systems Earth could produce. As they prepared for departure, David couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more complex than a simple peace summit. The other species in the galaxy had been spacefaring for millennia. Some had achieved interstellar travel when humanity was still discovering fire. Others had evolved beyond physical form entirely, existing as pure energy or collective consciousness. Humanity, with their mere 50 years of faster-than-light capability, was essentially a cosmic infant in comparison. The briefing documents made this disparity clear. The Altarians had achieved perfect harmony through genetic modification and meditation techniques that took centuries to master. The crystalline collective existed as sentient mineral formations that could share thoughts instantaneously across vast distances. The ethereal dominion had transcended physical existence altogether, appearing only as shimmering lights when they chose to interact with material beings. Each species had evolved in environments that shaped their approach to conflict resolution. The Aquatic Union had developed their civilization in the peaceful depths of ocean worlds where competition was minimal. The Hive Mind Collective had never known individual conflict because they shared a single consciousness. The peaceful commune had evolved from prey species that survived through cooperation and avoidance of violence. David studied these files late into the night as the Endeavour traveled through hyperspace. The more he learned about the other species, the more he realized how unique humanity's path had been. While other civilizations had achieved peace through unity, harmony, or transcendence, humanity had reached for the stars while still fighting wars on their home planet. Colonel Hayes shared his concerns. During their daily briefings, she would point out the tactical implications of humanity's position. They were the newcomers, the unknowns, the species that had somehow achieved interstellar travel despite their chaotic history. Every other civilization had apparently solved the problem of internal conflict before reaching for the stars. Humanity had simply packed their conflicts along for the journey. Dr. Torres was more optimistic. He believed that humanity's diversity and adaptability would be assets in galactic society. Where other species had achieved perfection through specialization, humans had survived through flexibility and innovation. Their ability to thrive in different environments and solve problems through creative thinking might be exactly what the galaxy needed. As they approached Harmony Station, the massive structure became visible through the ship's viewports. It was a marvel of engineering that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Crystalline spires twisted upward from a metallic base, while energy fields created artificial atmospheres around sections designed for different species' needs. Docking ports accommodated vessels of every conceivable design, from the organic curves of bioships to the geometric perfection of crystalline craft. The station bustled with activity as delegations from across the galaxy arrived for the summit. David watched ships that seemed to be made of living light dock alongside vessels that appeared to be grown rather than built. Each arrival was announced with fanfare and ceremony, as species that had been part of galactic civilization for millennia greeted each other with elaborate rituals. When the UNS Endeavour requested permission to dock, there was a notable pause. In the communications, the station's traffic control seemed unsure how to categorize the human vessel. It was neither the sleek perfection of advanced technology nor the organic beauty of evolved design. It was simply functional, built by a species that prioritized effectiveness over aesthetics. As David prepared to disembark, he realized that the real challenge wouldn't be the formal negotiations or the complex protocols of galactic diplomacy. The real challenge would be proving that humanity deserved a place among the stars, despite their imperfect journey to reach them. The great assembly hall of Harmony Station stretched beyond what human eyes could comfortably process. Crystalline walls curved upward into infinity, their surfaces displaying the homeworlds of every attending species in slowly shifting patterns. David Reed stood at the entrance, watching as beings he had only read about in classified reports moved through the vast space like living poetry. The opening ceremony began with the Altarian delegation performing their traditional Harmony meditation. 300 beings moved in perfect synchronization, their tall, graceful forms flowing like water as they demonstrated the mental unity that had brought peace to their civilization 3 millennia ago. Their movements created patterns of light that danced across the hall's surfaces, and when they finished, the entire assembly sat in respectful silence. The crystalline collective followed, their mineral forms resonating with pure tones that created music beyond human hearing. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the station's structure and into the bones of every organic being present. Their demonstration lasted exactly 17 minutes, each note calculated to represent harmony, cooperation, and the mathematical perfection of their society. When the ethereal dominion took their turn, the hall dimmed as beings of pure energy, manifested in swirling patterns of light. They had no physical form, existing only as consciousness given visible shape. Their display was abstract but beautiful, showing how they had transcended physical conflict by abandoning physical existence entirely. Other species watched in awe as the light beings danced through the air, their movements representing concepts that had no words in any material language. Each demonstration was more elaborate than the last. The Aquatic Union created a sphere of water that floated in the center of the hall, within which aquatic beings swam in complex patterns that told the story of their peaceful evolution. The hive mind collective moved as one organism, thousands of individual bodies acting with single purpose to create geometric formations that represented their unified consciousness. When David's turn came, he simply walked to the center of the hall and extended his hand to the nearest delegate. The gesture was so simple, so mundane compared to the elaborate displays that had preceded it, that a visible ripple of confusion passed through the assembly. The delegate, a tall being with silver skin and multiple arms, stared at the extended hand for several seconds before hesitantly reaching out to touch it. David grasped the alien's hand gently and shook it once, twice, 3 times. He smiled and said, "Hello, I'm David Reed, and I'm pleased to meet you." The translation systems carried his words to every being in the hall, but the gesture itself needed no translation. It was direct, personal, and completely without ceremony. The reaction was immediate and uncomfortable. Beings who had spent millennia perfecting elaborate rituals of greeting found themselves confronted with something so simple it seemed almost primitive. Some delegates backed away, unsure how to respond. Others whispered among themselves, trying to understand what hidden meaning lay beneath such a basic interaction. Colonel Hayes stepped forward and performed the same gesture with 3 more delegates. Her military bearing made the simple handshake seem somehow more formal, but the effect was the same. Dr. Torres followed suit, adding a slight bow that he hoped would show respect while maintaining the human tradition of physical greeting. The opening ceremony continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Where before there had been reverent appreciation for each species' demonstration, now there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. The humans had broken the pattern, introduced something unexpected into what was supposed to be a predictable sequence of peaceful displays. During the formal negotiations that followed, the humans' approach continued to unsettle the other delegates. When the Altarian representative spoke for 20 minutes about the philosophical foundations of their peaceful society, David simply asked, "How do you handle disagreements?" The question was direct, practical, and completely at odds with the flowery diplomatic language that had characterized previous discussions. The Altarian paused, clearly struggling with how to respond to such a blunt inquiry. In their society, disagreements were resolved through meditation and spiritual alignment. The concept of open discussion about conflicting viewpoints was foreign to their way of thinking. They had achieved peace by eliminating the conditions that created conflict, not by learning to manage it. Dr. Torres made things worse by asking questions that the other species found invasive. He wanted to know how different civilizations had evolved, what challenges they had faced, and how they had overcome them. His scientific curiosity was seen as interrogation. When he asked the crystalline collective about their reproductive processes, the mineral beings literally recoiled, their forms shifting to a defensive configuration. Colonel Hayes's contributions were perhaps the most troubling to the other delegates. When discussions turned to territorial boundaries and resource allocation, she spoke matter-of-factly about defensive strategies and security considerations. She mentioned Earth's military capabilities not as threats but as simple facts. The way one might discuss the weather or the price of grain, the human delegation seemed completely unaware of the effect they were having. They maintained eye contact during conversations, a behavior that many species found aggressive or intimidating. They asked follow-up questions instead of accepting formal statements at face value. They took notes on simple electronic devices. Instead of relying on perfect memory or collective consciousness, most disturbing of all, they seemed to expect disagreement. When the peaceful commune suggested that all species should adopt their philosophy of absolute nonviolence, David didn't immediately agree. Instead, he asked how such a philosophy would work in practice. What happened when peaceful species encountered aggressive ones? How did they protect themselves without compromising their principles? The questions weren't hostile, but they revealed a way of thinking that made the other delegates deeply uncomfortable. The humans approached every topic as if it were a problem to be solved rather than a truth to be accepted. They seemed to assume that any system, no matter how perfect it appeared, had flaws that needed to be identified and addressed. As the day wore on, private conversations began among the non-human delegations. The Serpentine hegemony's representative, Prime Speaker Yith, was particularly disturbed by the human approach. Her species had achieved peace through strict social hierarchy and absolute obedience to authority. The humans' tendency to question everything struck her as dangerously chaotic. The ethereal dominion found the humans' insistence on physical interaction primitive and limiting. How could a species that was still bound by matter and energy hope to understand the higher forms of existence? Their questions about transcendence showed a fundamental misunderstanding of what it meant to evolve beyond physical concerns. Even the more tolerant species found the humans difficult to categorize. The Aquatic Union had expected Earth's representatives to be like children, requiring gentle guidance and patient instruction. Instead, they encountered beings who seemed to challenge every assumption and question every principle that formed the foundation of galactic civilization. By the end of the first day, the human delegation had unknowingly created a crisis. They had participated in every discussion, followed every protocol, and treated every delegate with respect. Yet somehow, their mere presence had introduced an element of chaos into what was supposed to be a carefully orchestrated celebration of galactic harmony. David noticed the change in atmosphere during the evening meal. Conversations stopped when humans approached. Delegates who had been friendly during the opening ceremony now seemed distant and wary. The humans found themselves eating alone at tables that had been crowded just hours before. Colonel Hayes was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "We're missing something," she said quietly. "These people are scared of us and I can't figure out why." Dr. Torres nodded. "Every question I ask seems to make them more nervous. It's like they've never encountered a species that approaches problems the way we do." David stared across the dining hall at the other delegates, trying to understand what had gone wrong. They had come to Harmony Station as supplicants, hoping to earn a place in galactic society. Instead, they seemed to have become something else entirely, something that made civilizations that had known peace for millennia suddenly look over their shoulders in fear. The discovery happened during the third day of the summit, in the quiet hours between the afternoon sessions and the evening feast. Prime Speaker Yith of the Serpentine Hegemony had been searching the galactic archives for information about Earth's recent technological developments when she stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. The archives contained detailed records of every species that had achieved interstellar travel, including the complete history of their civilizations. What Yith found in humanity's file defied everything she thought she knew about the natural progression of sentient species toward peace and harmony. The humans had developed nuclear weapons. In 1945, they had achieved interstellar travel in 1975. The gap between these two milestones was 30 years. 30 years during which a species with the power to destroy planets had somehow managed not to eliminate themselves. Most disturbing of all, they had never stopped fighting wars during those 30 years or in the 50 years since. Yeth's serpentine form coiled and uncoiled as she processed this information. In her species' history, they had achieved perfect social harmony through rigid hierarchy before developing anything more dangerous than conventional explosives. The same pattern held for every other species in the galaxy. Peace came first, then technology, then the stars. It was the natural order of things, but humans had done everything backward. They had split the atom while still fighting global wars. They had reached for the stars while their homeworld was divided into hundreds of competing nations. They had developed faster than light travel while maintaining standing armies that could level continents. The archived footage was even more disturbing. Yith watched in horror as humans fought massive wars involving millions of soldiers, then immediately turned their attention to exploration and discovery. She saw them develop art, music, and literature while simultaneously perfecting weapons of mass destruction. They had created beauty and terror in equal measure, often by the same individuals, unable to process this information alone. Yith called for an emergency meeting of the senior delegates. Within an hour, representatives from 24 species had gathered in a secure conference room deep within Harmony Station. The assembled beings represented the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Species that had achieved perfect internal harmony millennia ago, the reaction to Yth's discovery was immediate and unanimous. The crystalline collective's representative, being called Resonance Prime, expressed the group's collective shock through harmonic frequencies that made the room's walls vibrate. This is impossible, the translation systems interpreted. No species can achieve interstellar capability while maintaining internal conflict. The energy requirements alone would be prohibitive. The ethereal dominion's representative, a shifting pattern of light that called itself luminous thought, pulsed with colors that indicated deep disturbance. Our models predict that any species developing such weapons would either achieve transcendence or destroy themselves within a generation. These humans have done neither. Dr. Valos of the Aquatic Union, his gills fluttering with agitation, brought up additional files from the archives. "Look at this," he said, his voice bubbling through the translation matrix. "They have fought over 400 documented wars since developing nuclear weapons, 400. And they have never used those weapons against each other again after the initial development. The implications were staggering. Every species in the galaxy had achieved peace through some form of unity, whether genetic, spiritual, or technological. The Altarians had modified themselves to eliminate aggressive impulses. The hive mind collective had merged their consciousness into a single entity. The peaceful commune had evolved from creatures so prey-oriented that violence was biologically impossible. Humans had done none of these things. They had somehow learned to live with their capacity for violence while simultaneously reaching for the stars. The archive footage showed them engaging in devastating conflicts while their scientists worked on space exploration. They had built weapons capable of destroying their planet while their artists created works of beauty that moved even alien observers. Commander Thale of the Voidwalkers, a species that had achieved peace through complete emotional suppression, accessed Earth's cultural archives. What he found there was perhaps more disturbing than the military records. Human art, literature, and music were suffused with themes of conflict, struggle, and overcoming adversity. They had created beauty from chaos, wisdom from suffering, and hope from despair. "They celebrate their conflicts," Thal reported, his voice flat with shock. "They have created entire art forms dedicated to memorializing their wars. They tell stories about heroes who overcome impossible odds through violence and sacrifice. They have turned their greatest flaws into sources of inspiration." The assembled delegates struggled to comprehend this information. In their civilizations, conflict was seen as a primitive phase that sentient beings naturally evolved beyond. The idea that a species could not only retain their capacity for violence but actually draw strength from it was completely foreign to their understanding of evolution and progress. Prime Speaker Yth pulled up Earth's recent history, focusing on the period since humans had achieved interstellar travel. "They have established colonies on 16 worlds in the past 50 years, she reported. "Each colony is independent, with its own government and military. They have created a distributed civilization that is specifically designed to survive the destruction of any single world, including Earth itself." The implications were clear. Humans had not achieved interstellar travel to explore or to seek knowledge. They had reached for the stars as a survival strategy, spreading their species across multiple worlds to ensure that no single catastrophe could eliminate them. Even their expansion into space was motivated by their understanding of conflict and destruction. More disturbing still was the discovery of how humans had actually achieved faster-than-light travel. Unlike other species who had developed the technology through peaceful scientific collaboration, humans had created their first FTL drive during a period of intense international competition. The breakthrough had come from a military research project designed to give one nation an advantage over others in space. Exploration. Dr. Valos accessed the psychological profiles that had been compiled during humanity's first contacts with other species. They show no signs of the emotional evolution that precedes interstellar capability, he reported. They still experience the full range of primitive emotions: anger, fear, jealousy, hatred. Yet they have somehow learned to channel these emotions into constructive purposes. The most troubling revelation came when they examined Earth's current status. The humans had not achieved peace by reaching the stars. They were still fighting wars on their homeworld, still competing for resources, still struggling with the same conflicts that had defined their species for millennia. Yet they had somehow managed to cooperate, enough to build a spacefaring civilization. The archived recordings from the human delegation's ship during their journey to Harmony Station revealed the depth of their differences. Colonel Hayes and Dr. Torres had engaged in heated debates about military strategy and scientific ethics. Ambassador Reed had mediated disputes between members of his own delegation. Even in their small group, the humans had demonstrated their capacity for conflict. But what disturbed the alien delegates most was not the presence of conflict among the humans, but how they handled it. They argued passionately about important issues, then worked together toward common goals. They disagreed with each other while maintaining respect and friendship. They had somehow learned to use conflict as a tool for improvement rather than a source of destruction. As the meeting continued, deep into the night, the assembled delegates reached a conclusion that chilled them to their cores. The humans were not like other species. They had not evolved beyond conflict. They had learned to live with it. They had not achieved peace. They had learned to wage controlled war. They had not transcended their violent nature. They had weaponized it for survival and progress. The final piece of the puzzle came when Commander Thale accessed Earth's military doctrine. Human warfare was not about conquest or domination. It was about protecting what they valued, about ensuring survival, about creating conditions where their chaotic civilization could continue to exist. They had turned war itself into a tool for preserving peace. Prime Speaker Yith summarized the group's findings in a way that made every delegate in the room recoil. "They are not a peaceful species that has learned to fight," she said. "They are a warrior species that has learned to cooperate. Everything they have achieved, including their journey to the stars, has been accomplished not despite their violent nature, but because of it." The implications were staggering. If humans could maintain their civilization while retaining their capacity for conflict, if they could reach the stars while still fighting wars, if they could create beauty while wielding weapons of mass destruction, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about evolution and progress was wrong. The assembled delegates sat in stunned silence as the truth sank in. They had invited humanity to join galactic civilization expecting to welcome children who needed guidance. Instead, they had unknowingly invited predators who had learned to wear the mask of civilization while remaining fundamentally unchanged. The question that haunted them all was simple. If humans could achieve so much while remaining violent, what would happen when they discovered that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten how to fight? The emergency session, called by Prime Speaker Yith, had been meant to be confidential, but secrets have a way of spreading through diplomatic channels faster than light itself. By the next morning, whispered conversations were taking place in every corner of Harmony Station as delegates shared fragments of information about humanity's true nature. The Aquatic Union was the first to react officially. Ambassador Reefsinger, whose species had evolved in the peaceful depths of ocean worlds where violence was nearly impossible, called an emergency session of his delegation. Within hours, their entire diplomatic corps was packing their equipment and preparing to leave the station. "We cannot remain in the presence of such beings," Reefsinger announced to the assembled delegates. "Our species has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of peaceful coexistence. We cannot compromise our principles by associating with creatures who glorify conflict." The Aquatic Union's departure sent shockwaves through the other delegations. These were among the most respected diplomats in the galaxy, beings whose commitment to peace was legendary. If they considered humans too dangerous to negotiate with, what did that say about the rest of the summit? The Hive Mind Collective was next to express their concerns. Their representative, a being that spoke for billions of interconnected minds, stood before the assembly and delivered a statement that chilled every delegate present. "We have analyzed the human psychological profiles and found them to be fundamentally incompatible with civilized society. Their capacity for individual thought, combined with their history of violence, represents a threat to the stability of galactic civilization. The hive mind's pronouncement carried enormous weight. Their species had achieved perfect unity through shared consciousness, eliminating the individual conflicts that plagued other civilizations. Their assessment of humanity as a threat was based on detailed psychological modeling that few species could match, but it was the reaction of the peaceful commune that truly demonstrated how deeply humanity had disturbed the summit. Their representative, Elder Harmony, was a being whose species had evolved from prey animals so gentle that they had never developed the concept of violence. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "We have studied the human cultural archives," Elder Harmony said, her words translating into harmonious tones that resonated through the assembly hall. "We have found evidence of celebration of violence, glorification of conflict, and the systematic teaching of warfare to their young. Such beings cannot be permitted to spread their influence throughout the galaxy." The psychological impact of Elder Harmony's words was devastating. If beings so peaceful that they had never conceived of violence found humans threatening, what did that say about humanity's fundamental nature? The peaceful commune had been one of the strongest advocates for including new species in galactic civilization. Their rejection of humanity sent a clear message to every other delegate. The fear was not just philosophical. Practical concerns began to emerge as species started to consider the implications of human membership in galactic society. The crystalline collective, whose mathematical perfection had brought them millennia of stability, began calculating the probability of human aggression spreading to other species. "Their psychological patterns are viral," reported Crystal Song, the collective's chief analyst. "Exposure to human concepts of competition and conflict could destabilize species that have achieved perfect harmony. We must consider the possibility of cultural contamination. The ethereal dominion, existing as pure energy without physical form, found themselves particularly disturbed by humanity's approach to existence. Their representative, luminous thought manifested as a swirling pattern of agitated colors as it addressed the assembly. These humans cling to physical existence as if it were the only reality, luminous thought pulsed. They have developed technology to enhance their physical capabilities rather than transcend them. They represent an evolutionary dead end that could infect other species with their limited perspective. The Void Walkers, who had achieved peace through complete emotional suppression, found human emotional intensity almost unbearable. Their representative, Commander Thale, delivered a report that made many delegates physically uncomfortable. "Human emotions are chaotic and unpredictable," Thale stated in his flat, emotionless voice. "They experience anger, fear, joy, and sorrow simultaneously. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. Such beings cannot be trusted to act rationally in crisis situations." As the day progressed, the mood in the assembly hall grew increasingly tense. Delegations that had been excited about welcoming humanity to galactic civilization now spoke in hushed tones about the need to protect their own species from human influence. The summit was transforming from a celebration of peace into a crisis management session. The Serpentine hegemony proposed the first formal response to the human threat. Prime Speaker Yith, her coiled form radiating authority, presented a proposal that sent shockwaves through the assembly. "We propose that humanity be classified as a protected species," Yith announced. "They should be confined to their current territory and prevented from expanding further into galactic space. We will provide them with the resources they need to maintain their civilization, but they must not be allowed to contaminate other species with their violent nature." The proposal was diplomatically worded, but its implications were clear. The Serpentine hegemony was suggesting that humanity be quarantined, treated like a dangerous virus that needed to be contained. The fact that such a proposal was being seriously considered showed how completely the mood had shifted. Other species began proposing their own solutions to the human problem. The Altarian suggested forced genetic modification to eliminate humanity's aggressive impulses. The Crystalline collective proposed psychological conditioning to bring human thought patterns into alignment with galactic norms. The Ethereal Dominion offered to help humanity transcend physical existence entirely. Each proposal was presented as a form of assistance, a way to help humanity overcome their primitive nature and join galactic civilization. But the human delegation, watching from their assigned seats, could see the truth. These were not offers of help. They were demands for a fundamental change. The galaxy was not interested in accepting humans as they were. They wanted to transform them into something else entirely. Dr. Torres was the first to fully grasp the implications. During a private meeting with his colleagues, he laid out the stark reality they faced. "They're not afraid of us because we're violent," he said. "They're afraid of us because we're successful." Every other species had to give up something fundamental about themselves to achieve interstellar travel. We didn't. Colonel Hayes nodded grimly. "They see us as proof that their way isn't the only way, that threatens everything they believe about evolution and progress." Ambassador Reed stared out at the station's viewing port, watching ships from across the galaxy dock and depart. "They've spent millennia building a civilization based on the premise that peace requires uniformity. We represent chaos, unpredictability, and the possibility that their perfect system might not be perfect after all." The fear was spreading beyond the diplomatic delegations. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy as news of humanity's true nature reached different homeworlds. The Peaceful Commune had issued a galaxy-wide warning about the dangers of human cultural contamination. The Hivemind Collective had begun fortifying their borders, preparing for the possibility of human aggression. Most disturbing of all was the reaction of the younger species, those who had achieved interstellar travel within the last few millennia. They were beginning to question their own paths to civilization, wondering if they had given up too much in their quest for peace. The human example was causing them to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of progress and evolution. The Galactic Council found itself facing a crisis unlike anything in its history. They had invited humanity to join galactic civilization as a formality, expecting to welcome another peaceful species into their ranks. Instead, they had discovered a species that challenged the very foundations of their understanding of sentient evolution. Emergency sessions were called on dozens of worlds as governments struggled to understand the implications of humanity's existence. Military commanders who had not thought about warfare in millennia found themselves dusting off ancient tactical manuals. Scientists who had focused on peaceful research for centuries began considering the defensive applications of their work. The fear was not just about what humans might do, but about what they represented. If a species could reach the stars while maintaining their capacity for violence, if they could create beauty while wielding weapons of mass destruction, if they could cooperate while retaining their individuality, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about civilization was wrong. By the end of the fourth day, the summit had effectively split into two camps. The majority of species were calling for some form of containment or transformation of humanity. A small minority, primarily younger species who had not fully integrated into galactic civilization, were beginning to express curiosity about the human approach to existence. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just humanity's place in the galaxy, but the future of galactic civilization itself. The question was no longer whether humans would be accepted into galactic society, but whether galactic society could survive the challenge that humanity represented to its fundamental assumptions about the nature of peace, progress, and civilization. The morning of the fifth day brought with it a tension that seemed to permeate the very structure of Harmony Station. Ambassador David Reed stood before the largest gathering of sentient beings in galactic history, knowing that the words he spoke in the next hour would determine not just humanity's fate, but possibly the future of interstellar civilization itself. The assembly hall was packed beyond capacity. Every species that had ever achieved interstellar travel was represented, along with observers from dozens of developing civilizations. The air thrummed with the nervous energy of beings who had never faced a crisis of this magnitude. David had spent the night preparing for this moment, not by crafting diplomatic speeches or consulting protocol manuals, but by simply thinking about what it meant to be human. He had watched the fear spread through the assembled delegations, seen the proposals for humanity's containment or transformation, and understood that no amount of traditional diplomacy would resolve this crisis. "Honored delegates," David began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems, "I stand before you not to defend humanity's actions, but to explain them. You have learned about our history, our conflicts, our violence. You have seen the evidence of our imperfection. And you are right to be concerned." The admission sent a ripple of surprise through the assembly. They had expected denials, justifications, or appeals for understanding. Instead, the human ambassador was acknowledging their fears as valid. "We are not a perfect species," David continued. "We have fought wars, committed atrocities, and made mistakes that have cost millions of lives. We have developed weapons capable of destroying worlds and have come terrifyingly close to using them. We are chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerous." Prime Speaker Yith shifted her coiled form, unsure where this admission was leading. The other delegates leaned forward, trying to understand what the human was attempting to accomplish. "But," David said, his voice growing stronger, "our imperfection is not our weakness. It is our strength. Every civilization in this galaxy has achieved peace by eliminating the source of conflict. You have modified yourselves genetically, merged your consciousness, transcended physical existence, or suppressed your emotions. You have achieved perfect harmony by becoming something other than what you were." He paused, letting his words sink. And before continuing, "We chose a different path. We chose to remain human while learning to be better humans. We kept our capacity for anger and learned to direct it at injustice. We kept our fear and used it to drive innovation. We kept our competitive nature and channeled it into exploration and discovery." Dr. Torres stepped forward, his scientific mind adding weight to David's words. "Every species here has told us about their path to peace, and each path required sacrifice. The Altarians gave up their individuality. The crystalline collective gave up their emotions. The ethereal dominion gave up their physical existence. You achieved peace by becoming less than you were?" The assembled delegates stirred uncomfortably. No one had ever framed their evolutionary achievements as losses before. "We achieved something different," Torres continued. "We learned to disagree without destroying each other. We learned to compete without eliminating our opponents. We learned to fight for principles while still respecting those who opposed us. We kept everything that made us human and found ways to make it work." Colonel Hayes stepped up to join her colleagues, her military bearing commanding attention throughout the hall. "You fear our capacity for violence, and you should. But you misunderstand its purpose. Human military doctrine is not about conquest or domination. It is about protection and preservation." She activated a holographic display that showed Earth's current military structure. Every human military exists to protect something: civilians, territory, principles, or way of life. Our weapons are not tools of aggression. They are insurance policies against those who would destroy what we value. The display shifted to show humanity's colonies across 16 worlds. Each of our colonies is defended not because we want to fight, but because we refuse to lose what we have built. We have learned that the best way to preserve peace is to be prepared for war. The reaction to this statement was immediate and intense. Several delegates recoiled visibly, while others began rapid consultations with their advisors. The concept of preserving peace through strength was alien to civilizations that had achieved harmony through unity. David reclaimed the floor, knowing that this was the crucial moment. "You have achieved perfect civilizations by eliminating imperfection. We have achieved something else entirely, a chaotic, messy, imperfect civilization that somehow works despite itself." He gestured to his companions. "Dr. Torres and I have disagreed about scientific ethics dozens of times during this summit. Colonel Hayes and I have fundamental differences about military policy. Even among our small delegation, we represent different perspectives, different approaches, different solutions to the same problems. The human ambassador smiled, and for the first time since the summit began, it was not interpreted as a threatening gesture, but those differences make us stronger. When Dr. Torres challenges my assumptions, we find better solutions. When Colonel Hayes questions my strategies, we develop more effective approaches. Our ability to disagree while still working together is not a flaw in our system, it is the system itself. The Peaceful Commune's representative, Elder Harmony, spoke for the first time in days. But conflict brings suffering, violence brings death. How can you justify maintaining such capacity for harm? Dr. Torres answered, his voice gentle but firm. Because the alternative is stagnation. Every major breakthrough in human history came from someone questioning established wisdom, challenging accepted truth, or refusing to accept that things had to remain as they were. Our conflicts taught us to think differently, to innovate, to adapt. He brought up a holographic display showing human technological development. We developed faster than light travel not through peaceful collaboration, but through intense competition between rival research teams. We solved the energy crisis through arguments between opposing scientific schools. Our greatest achievements came from our refusal to accept that any problem was unsolvable. Colonel Hayes added her perspective. Our military history taught us lessons that no peaceful species could learn. We know how to make difficult decisions under pressure. We know how to coordinate massive operations across vast distances. We know how to maintain morale in the face of impossible odds. She brought up displays showing human disaster response and colonization efforts. Every human colony was established using principles we learned from military operations. Every disaster response uses chain-of-command structures developed in warfare. Every exploration mission uses strategies born from conflict. The Assembly was beginning to understand that humanity's approach to civilization was not simply violent, but fundamentally different from anything they had encountered. The humans had not transcended their nature. They had weaponized it for constructive purposes. David delivered the crucial insight that would change everything. You fear us because you think we represent a return to chaos and violence. But we represent something else entirely. Proof that peace and conflict can coexist, that strength and cooperation can work together, that imperfection and progress are not mutually exclusive. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in the summit, the assembled delegates were not thinking about humanity as a threat to be contained, but as a puzzle to be understood. Prime Speaker Yith was the first to speak. You claim that your conflicts make you stronger? But how do we know that your violence will not spread to other species? How do we know that you will not corrupt the peace we have achieved? Colonel Hayes answered with military directness. Because we do not want your peace. We do not want to change you or force you to become like us. We want to trade with you, learn from you, and occasionally disagree with you. But we have no interest in making you into humans. The statement was so simple, so obvious, that it took several minutes for its full implications to sink in. Every other species that had joined galactic civilization had done so by adopting established norms and standards. The humans were suggesting something unprecedented, that they could participate in galactic society, while remaining fundamentally unchanged. Dr. Torres elaborated on this concept. We believe that diversity of thought leads to better solutions. We do not want a galaxy where everyone thinks alike, believes the same things, or approaches problems in the same way. We want a galaxy where different perspectives can interact and create something greater than any single approach could achieve. The crystalline collective's representative, Resonance Prime, vibrated with frequencies that indicated deep contemplation. You suggest that our differences could be beneficial rather than problematic. This concept requires significant analysis. David seized on this opening. Consider the problems that have challenged galactic civilization for millennia. Resource allocation, territorial disputes, first contact protocols. Have you solved these problems, or have you simply created systems to avoid dealing with them? The question struck at the heart of galactic civilization's greatest weakness. They had achieved peace by eliminating conflict, but they had also eliminated the mechanisms for dealing with conflict when it inevitably arose. The Aquatic Union's representative, who had been preparing to leave the station, paused in their departure preparations. The humans were offering something that no other species had ever provided, a different way of thinking about problems that defied conventional solutions. As the day progressed, the mood in the assembly began to shift. Species that had been calling for humanity's containment began to reconsider their positions. The younger civilizations, those that had not fully integrated into galactic norms, began to see possibilities they had never considered. The ethereal dominion's representative, luminous thought manifested in patterns that indicated curiosity rather than fear. Your approach suggests that transcendence is not the only path to advancement. This perspective requires consideration. By the end of the day, the assembly had reached a decision that surprised everyone, including the humans themselves. Humanity would be granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council, but with a unique status. They would not be required to conform to established galactic norms, but they would also not be permitted to impose their approaches on other species. The vote was close, and several major species abstained rather than support or oppose the measure, but it was enough. Humanity had earned a place in galactic civilization not by proving they were peaceful, but by proving they were valuable. As the summit concluded, David realized that they had achieved something unprecedented. They had not joined galactic civilization. They had changed it. The galaxy would never be the same because humanity had introduced the radical concept that unity did not require uniformity, that strength could coexist with cooperation, and that the greatest achievements might come from embracing imperfection rather than eliminating it. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in millennia, the galaxy had something it had not possessed since its earliest days: the potential for genuine change. Humanity had brought chaos to a perfect system, and somehow that chaos had made the system stronger.